The Shophetim series, Drums of War. Platon Pepper Jenkins must help the judges and the Black Files hunt down his father Ares. The human Platon Pepper Jenkins turned demigod does his best to take down his father Ares after disobeying him during the Vietnam War. The feud runs deep and long, causing Pepper to split and consider Ares, his father, the enemy. Decades later, the judges and the Black Files need Pepper's help hunting and taking Ares down. On the way, Pepper meets new allies as well as old enemies. Will Pepper help the forces of good prevail against the fallen angels, or will he go AWOL again and abandon his duties as a rogue soldier? Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away, behold, all things are become new. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Chapter 1. Vietnam, 1963. The United States had provided funding, armaments, and training to South Vietnam's government and military since Vietnam's partition into the Communist North and the Democratic South in 1954. By 1963, the military condition deteriorated. To support the South's government, the United States sent in 2,000 military advisors. One of the groups that were sent in was a super-secret supernatural military program known as SOAP, or Supernatural Offensive Advantage Program. The program had a success streak in WW2 when the U.S. military sent in their own supernaturals to fight against Hitler's. At first, a few judges had aided in this program, but soon exited it due to the military wanting to use other supernatural, such as vampires, werewolves, etc. creatures the judges would not work with and were against. The COUD condoned the program and announced they would not aid in the wars any longer if the US and UK military continued to use the program. This was a major reason the COUD is a separate government from those of the world. Ever since, the governments of the world have had their eyes on the power of the judges and wanted it for themselves, thus going forward with the SOAP operative program. The general over this operation was none other than the fallen angel Ares. Yes, Ares is the Greek god of war. Once the judges left the program, the fallen one saw his opportunity to infiltrate the U.S. government. His promises of success, power, and domination were enticing to the U.S. government. The United States government placed him in charge of the program and gave him full access to any and everything he might need to conquer the enemies of the U.S. Ares had many children throughout the world, causing havoc and war, but his adoptive son Platon Lewis, or Pepper, was to oversee the small group they sent into Vietnam. Pepper was not a demon, but a human that was given powers by the fallen angel Ares. Although Pepper calls himself a demigod, he really isn't. A demon or demigod is the result of a child produced by a human and fallen angel. Pepper's parents were both humans. Pepper's father had abandoned his mother soon after he was born. His mother soon found comfort in the fallen one, and Ares took Pepper in as his own. The fallen one gave Pepper his blood in order for the boy to grow in supernatural strength and power as a demigod, but in reality, he was just a super-juiced human. Pepper was never told this, and he had always believed Ares was his true father, giving him a bit of a complex at times. Pepper was trained from birth to fulfill the will of his father. Deep down, Pepper deeply hated Ares and his life, but knew there was no way he could go against his father. All his life he was trained in battle for the fulfillment of Ares's plans. Ares planned for Pepper to become a mighty warrior and to rule alongside him during the many wars the fallen one had planned. When he grew of age, Ares shipped his son off to his first war. The 25-year-old was soon tossed in a helicopter and flown across the ocean to Vietnam. The thick green jungle was a hot and humid place of chaos. Pepper was used to the heat and outdoors, being a native Texan, but the jungle was a different animal altogether. The soldier sat alone, other than the pilot, in the helicopter, and watched out the open door. This would not be Pepper's first time in the heat of battle, but it would be his first actual war. It didn't make it even less stressful. Every battle had its own threats and challenges. Pepper knew this, and he knew this war would be a very difficult one to dive into, but he did not want to let his father down. He was the perfect soldier in every way. He passed his physical and mental examination in boot camp with flying colors, and even showed promise in excelling in the SOAP program. Aries already had a few boots on the ground, but they were scattered and letterless. Aries thought his son would for sure take charge and lead the program into victory. The demigod sat with his back to the pilot, watching the lush green trees below. He lifted his helmet to scratch his messy mohawk. The sweat that beaded down his head and forehead caused the itching, along with the uncomfortable helmet. Reaching into his back pocket, he grabbed a bandana and began to wipe his forehead a bit. Nervous? The pilot glazed back to see Pepper wiping his face. Nah, just hot as hell. I thought Texas was bad, good lord. Pepper spoke as he spits out a wad of tobacco outside the open door of the helicopter. The bronze-skinned pilot chuckled a bit. It can be a bit humid, yes, but I'm used to it. The pilot confesses. Oh yeah? Yeah. I was born in Egypt. Moved out to the US as a teen. My pack kicked me out. I was next in line for an alpha, but my brother wanted it more. How did you get shipped to this crap hole? Pepper asked. I was recruited. The general found me on the streets and told me I had potential. A lone werewolf like myself needed a pack. So, I decided to take up his offer. The small group of supernatural people took me in, and the army gave me training and a purpose, I suppose. Name's Rami Sala. But the guys call me Tut. Tut, huh? Pepper lifted a brow. The oversharing pilot continued to ramble on. Yeah, 'cause I'm from Egypt, I guess. My family was considered royalty. From the line of Anubis. Our werewolf form is jackal-like. He explains. So, what is your name? Platon, but they call me Pepper. Nice to meet you, Pepper. Hey, aren't you the general's son? It finally clicked, and Rami turned completely to look Pepper over with his large blue eyes. Yes. Pepper sighed a bit. He wasn't thrilled about the idea of it and quickly changed the subject. How many others are in the group? Well, me, you, and 3 others. Oh, and Ms. Angela, who gives us the missions for Mary's. I don't see many hands to hand. I mostly fly. Aries thinks I am a bit scrawny. Rami chuckled as he circled the small camp up ahead. You are a hell of a pilot, Tut, but too small for most battles. Rami mimicked Aries' voice. Yeah, he is the north end of a southbound mule. Pepper scoffed. Rami laughed at Pepper's joke as he sat the chopper down. Rami turned the helicopter off and exited with Pepper. The two walked towards the small outpost, chatting a bit. Pepper scanned the area in front of them. It was surrounded by a thick line of the jungle. A few buildings were nestled in the middle of the clearing, along with a larger building. The bigger building was most likely a mess hall and/or meeting hall. Pepper removed his backpack and continued to survey the area. As soon as the demigod made a complete turn, he was face to face with an angry-looking black woman. She was young, around the same age as him, but a bit more bitter-looking. You are late. She barked and she crossed her arms as she looked him up and down. Excuse me? Pepper had heard her, He was just a bit taken back by her strong attitude. Her hair was flat in the front and pulled back into a large fluff in the back. She wore a black army hat and all-black uniform with the SOAP logo. She was of average height and slender, but Pepper knew if she wanted to she could take him on and probably kick his butt. "You are Ares's boy, right? Well, I don't care whose son you are, I want you to know that we have rules here, and I give them." She pointed to him. Rami stepped in front of the angry woman and pleaded with her. The small Egyptian could see Pepper about to snap. "Sorry, Miss Angela, it was my fault. I had to refuel at the base." Angela put her hands on her hips and raised a brow. She looked down at Rami, and then her eyes slowly gazed up at the stealing Pepper. "Come on, I need to introduce you to the others." She turned and made her way towards the large building. Rami turned and smiled at Pepper. "Sorry about that. I forgot to warn you about her. She has a mean streak and iron in her blood, but deep down she has a heart of gold." Rami explains. "Yeah, she is a real peach," Pepper said sarcastically. The demigod picked up his backpack and slung it over one shoulder. He then proceeded to follow the small werewolf. Pepper entered the building and glanced around. The other three men were inside waiting for the arrival of the demi. Angela walked to the front of the building and stood in front of the large map. "Everyone, this is Platon, your new team leader. He is a demigod and son of the general," she explained. Angela then turned around to point out different things on the map and speak. Rami leaned over to Pepper and began to explain to him who everyone was. "Angela Smith, she is the representative of SOAP and the only human in the group. She doesn't really go on missions. She could if she wanted to, being one heck of a fighter, but Ares uses her as intelligence. She pretty much works under him and relays messages to us." Rami then used his head to get Pepper to look towards the right side. A dark-haired Brit sat with his feet on the table. "That is Doc. Flynn Jameson. He is an ex-judge and doctor. Ares recruited him while he was in Britain. The lion shifter judge wanted nothing to do with being a judge after his wife left him. He soon turned to the life of crime and became a sort of doctor for Ares and his allies. The lion also has training in the field and is used as a combat medic most times." Rami then glanced towards the opposite side, where a Japanese male sat leaning against his katana. "Hatsuo Ryu Furikawa. Fu is an Akami, wolf in Japanese, a wolf like me, but deadlier. Fur is one of the main hitmen and sometimes bodyguard of crime lord Kajimori Kitano. Ares's deal with the crime lord is that he trades Kitano guns and money for Fur's membership in this group." Rami then glanced behind them, and so did Pepper for a moment. A well-built dirty blonde man sat with his back against the wall by the entrance. His arms were folded as he listened to Angela. "Barry Thomas, tank, is a human super soldier. The Army's secret program is a branch of SOAP pumped full of chemical and magic stuff. It is their experiment to see if they can make humans into supernatural or as strong as. It works, but sometimes Tank has outbursts of rage and night terrors." Rami was about to continue, but Angela turned around and snapped at him. "Rami, are you paying attention?" she scolded. "Yes, ma'am. We need to fly out 4 clicks north and stake out the village for Pop." Angela glared once more, then turned around to continue talking. "Pop was our old team leader. He is a Civil War vampire. He was turned when he was a slave in the Union Army." Rami explains. "How did they capture him if he is a vampire?" Pepper asked, raising a brow. "They have a wrong or their word for dragon." The dragon shifter wounded Pop. Flynn responded. Hatsuo mumbled something in Japanese. He was not too happy as he showed a burn mark on his hand from the thing. So, what you are saying is we have to go in the middle of the jungle to rescue a vampire from the wrong and fight a dragon. Pepper blinks a couple of times. Yes, Rami said in a cheerful tone. You think you can handle that, Junior? Tank spoke up as he rose from his chair. He walked towards Pepper and sized him up. Pepper glared at Tank and then spit some tobacco snuff on the ground. Now boys, save the fighting out there. Rami, the heli goes up at 10. Angela commanded as she exited the building and walked to her own personal building. Flynn stood up and walked past the two men in the middle. Well, are we chaps just gonna spend the day testing your manhood, or are we going to rescue Pop? Flynn growled as he walked out. Hatsuo glared at Pepper and then said something to Barry in Japanese. For I really wish you would learn some English. Tank cursed at his Japanese comrade. Tank then turned back to give Pepper one last glare before following the rest towards the helicopter. The helicopter flew over the jungle canopy towards the drop-off point. The men were to exit and walk a mile into the jungle to save Pop and kill the dragon. They were to bring the vampire back to this point to board the helicopter back to base. Easier said than done. The village where he was held up was a major base for the Viet Cong. If they were successful, not only would they rescue their friend, but also take down a major stronghold. Words of advice to know a pilot in this war is to be a fortunate man. Tank spoke as a cigarette hung from his lips. You know those things will kill you. Flynn spoke up and mentioned the cigarette. I am in the middle of a war, old chap. Everything out here will kill me. Another word of advice: make sure the leaves you use to whip your butt are not poison ivy. Tank continued as Pepper sat silent. He speaks from experience. Flynn added as Tank shot him a glare. Flynn laughed and Hatsuo chuckled along with the doctor. What are you laughing at? You can't even speak English. Barry Aka, Tank yelled. Hatsuo or Fur's face dropped. He then gripped his katana and started yelling in Japanese. Flynn laughed and raised his voice to try and get them to settle down. All right, Tank. Isn't your father a preacher? Where are some of that humble meekness and whatnot? My dad is a preacher, I am not. Tank kept his eyes on Fur. Are they always like this? Pepper shook his head in disappointment. Unfortunately. Flynn sighed. Pop found it amusing, however, I do not. Tank can be a little, what is a good word? Extra. Good luck trying to get him in line, Pep. Flynn sighed. I am not taking no orders from some young brat. I don't care who his dad is, I am not take, but before he could finish his words, Pepper had Tank dangling halfway out the helicopter. Look. I didn't want to be here, to begin with. I certainly didn't want to have to lead a lot of you misfits, but here I am. Pepper screamed over Tank's own screams as he dangled from the helicopter. Pepper. Come on. Rami looked back to notice Tank dangling out the copper. A few more minutes and Pepper finally brought Tank inside the helicopter. I am stuck here with the rest of you, so cut me some slack and stop giving me crap. Comprehend? Or next time I am tossing you out. Pepper pointed his finger at Tank as the super soldier glared at him. The remainder of the flight was quiet as the men glared at each other silently. Rami finally hovered the copper over a patch of clearing in the jungle. Pepper was the first one off the helicopter. He landed in the long grass below. Placing his rifle on his shoulder, the demi slowly walked forward, studying the map in his hands. Tank was next. He hopped out holding his M60 machine gun with 7.62x 51mm ammo strapped across his chest. The super soldier was a foe to be reckoned with. Fur was next out, the helicopters holding his katana on his waist, and lastly was Flynn. The doctor had the same rifle as Pepper, an M1 Garand. He also had a leather satchel bag slung around his shoulder. It held basic medical items and a first aid kit. All four men were dressed in black solid army fatigue. "What is the plan?" Flynn asked. "I need to see the village and situation firsthand before I can tell you that," Pepper replied as he walked ahead of them. He knew he was the new guy, and they didn't fully trust him yet. Pepper also knew he would have to go above and beyond to prove himself to these guys. He understood that, and if he were in their shoes, he would do the same thing. The rest of the hike through the thick jungle was silent. The men's guard was up, so they were too busy looking out for the enemy than to argue. As the men approached the tree line, Pepper halted and squatted down the ground. "I thought this was a small village," he whispered in anger towards the others. "We thought so too." Angela wasn't too clear. Flynn replied. "She needs to learn the difference between a village and a small city." Barry cursed. It was a village to her standard, but it was very large. Almost like a very small city. Huts and ratty-looking buildings were clustered together and went on past the view of the men. "We have to wait till nightfall now," Pepper cursed under his breath. The others agreed and silently waited for the sun to sink below the trees. Nightfall fell and the SOAP task force made their way through the large village or city. Most of the people were inside, only a few were littered about the streets. Pepper made a left turn as he weaved through alleyways. He was almost caught when a few soldiers passed by. Fur didn't speak fluent Vietnamese, but he understood a few keywords, especially dragon and vampire. He signaled to Doc. "The dragon is in the main building in the middle of town." Doc peeked around to see a huge building towards the center not far from where they were. "I and Fur will go after the dragon, Doc. You and Tank go and see if you can find Pop." Pepper gave the orders, then the men branched off in different directions. "How the heck are we supposed to find Pop?" Tank grumbled to Doc as they turned to look for the vampire. "I am not sure. Maybe find the more heavily guarded building?" Flynn suggested as they made their way down the back alleyways. The duo turned down another alley and ran into a white boy in his early teens. The boy was using the bathroom and went to take off running. Tank grabbed a hold of him and covered his mouth. "We will let you go, but if you scream, I will cut your tongue out." "You understand?" Tank hissed in the boy's ear. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Flynn asked the boy. "Name's O'Grady. Dad and I are trying to buy some coke for his new business." The Irish lad spoke softly. "Look, kid, we are not here for you. We are looking for a fellow officer. A black guy, older and super strong." Tank explains as he grips his shoulder. "I will give you £200 if you tell me where he is and to keep quiet." Flynn gave the boy a grin as he flashed him a wad of cash. The boy went to grab the money, but Flynn moved it out of his reach. "You get the money after you show us where the man is," Flynn explained. The boy nodded and turned to walk across the street. The soldiers followed the boy, keeping their guard up. It was a few more turns down alleyways as Flynn and Barry followed the O'Grady boy before they reached a dead end. The boy stopped and pointed to the hut at the end. "I think he is in there." He then held out his hands for the money. Flynn dug in his pocket and stuffed the money in the boy's greedy hands. "Here, if you are lying, I will take more than that money back," Flynn threatened. The boy nodded and ran off. The boy rounded the corner and looked at the wallet he swiped from the lion. He grinned as he began to count the rest of the cash. Silently now, Tank. We don't want to cause any alarm. You go high, I go around back. We get Pop and meet up by the tree line for the others," Flynn explained to Barry. Tank took out a large knife and made his way around to the back of the hut. Doc went in the other direction so he could clear his side of the hut. Both men ran into a guard. Tank used his knife in the back of the guard's neck, while Flynn choked the guard on his side out. Flynn was a doctor, so he did his best not to kill anyone unless it was necessary. After Tank dropped the body, he made his way up the side of the hut. Doc reached the back entrance and peeked inside. There were only 2 men inside. Pop was tied up in the middle, dangling from the roof. Tank looked down to see Doc below the back entrance. Doc signaled that there were only 2 inside. The then signaled he would take the one on the left, and Tank would go right. Tank nodded and waited for the doctor to make his entrance. Pepper and Hatsuo made their way silently towards the center of town. The 2 soldiers were almost like ghosts as they passed up the few wandering villagers and guards. Pepper never saw a dragon before, nor had he ever fought one, so he was a bit nervous. The pair reached the large building. It stuck out due to its stone pillars and graduate compared to the wood and thatch huts that surrounded it. They must have built the village around this ancient stone temple. Pepper and Fern knocked out a few standing guards and grabbed their cloaks. As they were in the middle of retrieving the cloaks to blend in, a high-pitched scream pierced the darkness. Pepper's head shot up and his eyes darted in the direction of the scream. 2 men were dragging a bound woman up the steps of the temple. She was struggling to get away and yelling in her native Vietnamese tongue. Hatsuo signaled to Pepper something to the effect of eating. "They are going to feed her to the dragon?" he asked. Fern nodded his head yes. "Okay, we follow them inside as if we are guards escorting. We can catch the dragon off guard if he is too worried about his meal," Pepper explained and placed the dead man's hat on his head. Hatsuo agreed and followed Pepper as he briskly walked towards the steps. The 2 men followed the other guards who were dragging the woman inside. Once inside, Pepper was able to see the layout. Candles and incense filled the place with light and smoke. The temple was almost empty besides the huge 10-foot-tall 30-feet-long snake-like dragon that was sleeping in the middle. He looked like the dragons on the many Chinese art Pepper had seen throughout his life. His bright green scales moved, and he breathed while his red bread-like feathers draped to the ground. The screams of the woman caused one of his golden eyes to open. The guards bowed their heads as they approached, dragging the woman. The dragon's head slowly rose from on top of his claws as he eyed the 3 humans in front of him. Pepper and Hatsuo split and hid behind 2 large pillars that held the front of the temple up. Pepper watched as the men pushed the woman in front of them. She fell to the ground crying as she looked up at the dragon. The large snake-like jaw slowly unhinged, and Pepper signaled for Hatsuo to attack. Pepper shot both men as he ran out from behind the pillar and scooped up the tiny woman in his arms. It was just in time as the dragon's head came crashing down on the stone floor. Hatsuo let out a yell as his katana was raised high. He jumped up and slammed it down hard on the dragon. It struck its eyelid, blinding the dragon on one eye. The scales were not as hard as a normal dragon. They were like lizards or snakes, smooth and leathery. The katana made a huge gash as Hatsuo brought it down towards the stone floor. The dragon's snake-like body thrashed in the temple, knocking over candles and 1 stone pillar. Pepper knew they needed to take the fight outside, but he was worried about being overrun with Viet Cong. The woman clung to Pepper as the demigod turned to give fur cover fire. The katana-wielding werewolf slashed the dragon a couple more times before rolling to dodge the snapping jaws. The dragon continued to thrash and snap towards the men, knocking down another pillar. The building shook and Pepper yelled towards Fur. "We need to get out of here before it comes down on us." Pepper started to run towards the exit. Fur turned to follow but was knocked back by the dragon's claws. He flew and hit the stone wall in front of Pepper. The demigod sat the woman down and checked on Fur. He was dazed and his chest was a bit bloody from the claws of the dragon. Pepper then had an idea. He was going to bring the temple down on the dragon. "Help him out." He motioned for the woman to help Fur out of the temple. He repeated himself again, unsure if she spoke English. She nodded and replied in broken English, "Yes. We'll help." The woman bent down to help Hatsuo up. Pepper then turned to fire his rifle as he ran full force at the pillar. He used his shoulder to drive into it, causing it to wobble and then fall over. The temple was now collapsing. Large stones and bricks began to fall all around the temple. Doc and Tank had Pop's arms on their shoulders as they made their way out the village. They were almost to the tree line when the loud crashing noise startled them. They both turned to see the temple in the middle of the village starting to crumble and soldiers running out of huts. "You take Pop, I'm going to help the others." Tank dropped their old team leader on the doctor and took off running towards the village center. Tank yelled to get the attention of some of the soldiers as he fired upon them. The super soldier mowed down at least a dozen as he made his way towards the temple. The villagers who wanted no part in the fight ran back inside their homes. Tank finally reached the temple and watched a woman exit with Hatsuo. The injured wolf spoke in angry Japanese towards Barry. "I have no idea what you are saying. Where is Pepper?" he asked. Hatsuo pointed towards the temple, and Barry took off inside the crumbling structure. Inside, Pepper was still dodging the dragon and firing his rifle at the beast. Barry joined in on shooting at the dragon, only pausing to ask what Pepper's plan was. "We need to bring down the temple on top of it," Pepper shouted. Barry nodded and ran towards the remaining pillar. He tackled it with all his force. The stone gave way and cracked in half. Pepper continued to fire at the dragon to cover Barry until he ran out of ammo. "I'm out. Come on, we have to go." Pepper yelled at Barry as now bigger pieces of the temple fell. The side walls collapsed on top of the back half of the dragon, but the front half was still trying to chase the men. Both men barely made it out of the temple before it collapsed fully. The only thing that remained was a huge pile of rubble. As the dust settled, Barry and Pepper stood there trying to catch their breath. They were both bloody, sweaty, and covered in dust and dirt from the collapse. "Well, that was easy," Barry spoke up from his pained breaths. Pepper was about to reply when the rubble began to shift. The dragon's head peeked out, and just as he was about to strike, Hatsuo brought his katana straight down in its skull. "Well, the Jap is good for something." Barry chuckled. "I wouldn't be celebrating just yet." Pepper spoke as he turned to face the 24 men who had rifles pointed at them. Hatsuo removed his blade and made his way down the stones to stand beside Barry and Pepper. Just as the Viet Cong soldiers were about to fire on the 3 men, a helicopter descended upon the site. Rami used the helicopter's guns to mow down the enemy that surrounded the rest of the team. Flynn had made his way back to the helicopter and explained to Rami. When the men were dead, Flynn tossed out a rope so they could all climb up. What I told you, having a pilot is a blessing. Barry laughed as he quickly climbed up the rope. Hatsuo was right behind him. Pepper reached for the rope, but paused and turned his head around, looking for the woman they helped. The woman noticed Pepper again and she ran towards the demigod. Pepper gripped the rope with one hand as he faced the young woman. "Come with us, we can bring you back to your village," Pepper asked, but she refused with a head shake. "No, this is my home. You save it." "Thank you." She gives Pepper a kiss on the cheek. "Come back anytime." She cupped his face as he was being lifted by Flynn. "I didn't catch your name?" he called out to her. "Sho." She called out towards him. Chapter 2. A few days later, Angela came to the mess hall with another mission for the small group. She had allowed them to heal up a few days before going back out in the field, but those days were not long enough. Pepper was already regretting the fact he agreed to lead this small group for his father. He was under the understanding that they were there to help aid the people in Vietnam, but between the last mission and the news throughout the country, his faith in his father's efforts was fading. In the back of his mind, he knew the god of war had other intentions. No matter how much Ares tried to hide it from the U.S. government with flowery words, Pepper knew better. Blood, violence, and death were all the fallen angel cared about. And for thousands of years, that was not about to change. Pepper was deep in thought before he was snapped out of it by Angela's words. "Pop is now back in the U.S. recovering. The village you guys helped is now the main checkpoint for our other army boys, so good job," Angela explained. She gave a faint smile, but soon her demeanor changed back to her regular stern attitude. "But we still have plenty of work to do. The next mission is to take out a few tunnel systems. You all are to go in, clear out the tunnels and collapse them," she explained. "We can just send the mutt, he can dig them out." Barry the super soldier laughed as he used his thumb to point to Hatsuo. Hatsuo quickly jumped up and screamed in Japanese towards Barry. The super soldier just laughed and waved the Japanese man off. Angela rolled her eyes and used her stick to slam on the map to get their attention. The men grew silent and gave her their full attention. "Rami will only be able to take the team halfway, the rest of the way will have to be hiked." She used the stick to point the location on the map. "Make sure to pack extra socks, gentlemen, it is going to get rainy." She smirked as she looked over the men. The Viet Cong launched a formidable offensive while people continued to practice life's daily rituals underground. Located 75 kilometers northwest of Ho Chi Minh City, the Cu Kai tunnels are an elaborate underground network. The tunnels, or Black Echo as they were referred to, was a major obstacle for the army. For the Viet Cong, life in the tunnels was difficult. Air, food, and water were scarce, and the tunnels were infested with ants, venomous centipedes, snakes, scorpions, spiders, and rodents. The tunnels were also rigged with booby traps and punji sticks, making it very difficult for the U.S. military to search and take them out. This mission would be perfect for the supernatural team. Not only would it allow them to prove their worth, but also give brownie points towards Ares. The success would allow the opportunity for the Fallen One to expand the operation and gradually make the supernatural a norm. A lot was riding on Pepper's shoulders. He knew his father expected him to make this group successful. The few members were highly trained and deadly beings, they just lacked unity. Pepper knew he needed to work on bringing the team together under one goal. Each man had their own abilities, but they needed to stop the petty fighting and come together as a unit. Rami hovered about the small clearing and watched the men slide down the rope. The Egyptian wanted to tag along, but he knew that was a bad idea. He was the pilot, and the team needed him to stay alive and well enough to fly them in and out of danger. Pepper landed in the high grass and signaled to Rami all was clear. Rami waved back before turning the helicopter around. The pilot would set his chopper down not far from the drop-off site and wait for the men to return. The mission would most likely last a few days, so the pilot would set up a temporary camp for himself. Pepper made his way to the front of the line and began to lead the three men into the thick jungle. "What is the plan?" Flynn spoke up as he followed behind Pepper. "Pretty simple. Take out the enemy and take the tunnels over. They want them cleared out. I don't know why they just don't bomb it like everything else." Pepper confesses. "I am sure it is to see what men, intelligence, arms, and supplies they have. Also, to document them, then we can destroy them." Flynn spoke up. Pepper should have known that he felt a little embarrassed due to the fact he did not. It was probably due to the fact he was just thrown into this position, but still, he was a son of a war god. He chalked it up to the heat and changed the subject. "How did you come out here? And with us? You are being a judge and all?" Pepper asked. The doctor kept silent for a moment as he walked alongside Pepper. The other two men were behind. Barry sang low to himself, while the Japanese werewolf kept his eyes peeled. "Ex-judge?" Flynn finally spoke and emphasized. "I was a doctor. Let's just say I put my family over the duties of a judge and lost both. I defected and Ares recruited me for my abilities." Flynn explained his situation as generically as he possibly could. He didn't know Pepper well enough to tell him his secrets and life story. Flynn didn't trust easily, and these men were not very trustworthy. "I had a few run-ins with judges. They are uptight, law-bound. Their life revolves around their god and what they have to do for him." Pepper chuckled, trying to ease the tension. Flynn gave a slight smile, but Pepper could tell there was pain behind it. As the men reached a small clearing, they all halted. The sounds of footsteps in the distance caught their attention. Normal humans would have not been able to hear this, but remember, the group was not totally human. Hatsuo sniffed the air as his hand gripped his katana. Barry paused mid-step, and the doctor glared at the tree line. Pepper raised his gun and waited for whoever was walking their way to clear the tree line. A handful of men emerged from the jungle. They halted when they saw the four men and raised their hands slowly. "Easy, mate, we are on the same side." The man in the middle spoke. Pepper lowered his gun and signaled to the other to ease up. The Australian then eased up as well and began to explain themselves. The three men were Australian tunnel rats on the way to a mission. The tunnels were getting out of hand, and the human forces were having a hard time dealing with it. Ares saw an opportunity to show off his men's superiority. That was why Pepper and the others were doing such a mission. Normally, the band of supernatural misfits was sent in to deal with other supernaturals, but good ole Ares likes to show off. "We heard about a few north of here," Pepper added, breaking the awkward silence. "We didn't hear anything, nor did we see any, mate." The man spoke as he looked back at his men. He then turned to face Pepper, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Believe me, they are there," Flynn added. "I wish we could help, but our orders are to head south." The man sighed. "Took down a couple of tunnels a few days ago out east. They were pretty much empty though. It was a bit strange, yeah." The Aussie confessed. "Don't worry, we got this." Barry chuckles. "Very well, we will leave you to it." "Hey, you got any smokes?" the man asked. Pepper nodded and tossed him a pack of Camels. The men all shook hands and parted their ways quickly. Pepper was relieved. He needed to get his men as close to the tunnels as possible. It would be a 2-day trip as it was, and there was no time for chit-chat. Pepper then signaled for the men to keep going. He wanted to reach the halfway point by nightfall at least. They might have been superhuman, but the men still needed rest. A few more hours in and the SOAP team reached the halfway mark. Pepper tossed his bag down and cracked his back. As he stretched, his eyes wandered around the tree line for any movement. He and his men had to always keep up their guard. We need to get a few hours of sleep in before then keep moving. Are we doing a night assault again? Flynn asked. I think it would be the best option since most of us can see or partially see in the dark. Pepper explained. Barry, help me with starting a fire. Hatsuo, you and Flynn do a quick sweep. The Japanese wolf bowed a bit and turned to walk into the jungle. Flynn went in the other direction. Barry dug his heel in the dirt and began to make a circle for the fire. Thunder echoed loudly in the distance, and the two knew it would most likely start to rain. This rain? Barry continues to build a small fire and curses as he does so. You know the army is cloud seeding. He added. What? Pepper rose a brow. Yeah. They are playing with the weather to make it rain. That doesn't surprise me. Pepper began to break sticks and toss in the circle. War gives them the license to do whatever the heck they want. Invent new gadgets and ways of killing people. Population decreased. Money grab. New land. New medicine. Heck, look at me. A human experiment. Barry began to put up a small overhang to protect the fire and men from the oncoming rain. Look at us. The soap squads. The super soldier continued to ramble on. Barry rolled his eyes at the name. Instead of cleaning up streets and beaches, we out here cleaning up the so-called enemy. Do you really think they would allow people like us to help? We are the bad guys, remember. Mercenaries, killers, supernatural, half human, half monster. Just passing under the radar. Pepper added. Man is true, but I signed up to fight and serve my country. No matter how corrupt they are. They pay extra for the experiments. And if I survive this, the army is going to give me a big payday. I and my girl can live a nice little life. You believe that? Pepper sat on a log as he kept his eyes on Barry. Yeah, why not? Because the government does not care about us. And Ares, he only cares if we get the job done. Do you really think they will let a successful experiment like you just leave? They sold you a lie. Pepper hated to break it to him like that, but it was the truth. One day we will be out in the open, things like us. So, it won't matter. Barry added. Yeah, and it will be pure chaos. Evil is better left to the shadows, otherwise it becomes popular and accepted. The government will try and keep its secrets for as long as it can. All in order to have the upper hand in control and conquering. If every Tom, Dick and Harry had this and could do what we could, then I would be stuck at McDonald's flipping burgers. Pepper lit a cigarette and took a huge puff. We will never be able to get out of this. Only through a body bag, my friend. Pepper stood up and helped Barry finish the handover. Barry was silent for the first time. Pepper knew he must have been considering the mess he got himself into. Many men and women were lured into the web of the government due to a good punchline. Pepper felt almost sorry for this man. He practically threw his life and his girlfriend's life away. Beware of the Greeks. Bearing gifts was something he always lived by. Pepper knew the dark side. He knew what it meant to serve and to be a creature like himself. Barry may have not liked Pepper, but he respected him for telling the truth. Now the super soldier was having second thoughts about his life choices. The other two returned to report an all clear. The group then sat down to have a quick meal. The men remained silent and alert. Pepper told the others to catch the first 4 hours of sleep, and he would sleep the remaining 2. The men huddled around the fire as the rain poured down around them. Pepper sat up holding his gun as he peered into the jungle. He could see the sun setting low, causing the animals to come alive all around them. Even in the rain, the birds and monkeys screeched. It was around twilight when the men reached the entrance to the tunnel. It was so buried underground, most would have stepped right over it. Pepper almost did himself, but the wolf pointed it out. His strong sense of smell was a great asset. Pepper put his pack down and looped his gun around his body. "I will go in first. Barry and Hatsuo, you can follow me. Flynn, guard the exit. If and when we hit a fork in the tunnel we can branch off. Remember, we need to kill on sight. After we gather any information and weapons, then we can rig the explosives to blow the tunnel." Pepper lifted the small grass lid that covered the tunnel entrance. The hole was tiny and pitch black. For once Pepper was nervous about going into battle. He was never one to be claustrophobic. This was a bit much. The demigod had to squeeze himself headfirst into the hole, while Flynn lowered him by his feet. He had his pistol out in front of him in case an enemy was waiting for him. No doubt there would be booby traps. The jungle was littered with them, and in these tunnels, there was bound to be more. The last thing he wanted was to be blown up by a claymore or land in a pit with punji sticks. Pepper reached the bottom of the tunnel, and Flynn let his legs go. The air was stale and musty. The only light Pepper could see was from the entrance as the other men peered down. Pepper opened his metal lighter and watched the flame light up the tunnel he was in. There was no way to walk upright, nor could he crouch. The Vietnamese people were smaller and short, so they could have crouched to walk in, but Pepper was tall in stature, so he had to crawl or shimmy on his hands and knees. Pepper felt for any tripwires or entrance traps. There was none, so the demi gave a thumbs up. Flynn then lowered Barry and soon after the wolf. The walls of the tunnel were slimy and cool to the touch. The eerie silence and darkness engulfed the trio. It was so quiet your very breath was amplified. A few feet down there was a split. The wolf took a right and Pepper and Barry continued forward. The two finally reached a door, and Pepper paused. He signaled to Barry he would go in first. Barry nodded and waited with his gun in his hand. Beads of sweat were dripping from both men. The heat combined with the anxiety of being in close quarters underground had them sweating bullets. Pepper slowly opened the door and walked in. To his surprise, the large room was tall enough for him to stand up, but the happy relief was short-lived. The large room was filled with beds. This was where the Vietcongs were sleeping. Pepper couldn't help but blurt out a curse word. The men who were asleep realized Pepper's presence. They leaped from their beds and grabbed their weapons. Pepper flipped over the small table beside him for some cover. Bullets littered and splintered the wood table, causing the wood to hit Pepper's side. He yelled in pain as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Barry tried to get into the room, but Pepper was slumped in front of the door. The gunfire was deafening to everyone in the room. Pepper did his best to shoot back. He even managed to hit 2 out of the dozen men inside, but he knew he was a sitting duck. The demigod finally grabbed a grenade and tossed it as far as he could from himself. Pepper tipped over a metal filing cabinet that was on the other side of the wall and curled himself behind it. The demi thought the gunshots were loud. The explosion made Pepper scream in more agony. His ears rang as his mind clouded from the force of the blast. Not only did his injuries and ears throb in pain, but now the pocket of the tunnel collapsed on the Pepper due to the explosion. A wall of dirt fell in on him and the remaining men who were alive. Barry finally ripped the door from the wall, but had to take a step back as dirt slid down from where the door once was. "Hatsu! Get your wolf butt over here and help me dig!" Barry screamed as he began flinging dirt. Hatsuo crawled quickly to the sound of Barry yelling. When he arrived, the wolf watched the soldier digging away at a wall of dirt. "Pepper is in there." That was all Barry could spit out. Without hesitation, the Japanese werewolf began digging frantically alongside Barry. The pressure of the dirt on top of Pepper caused him to take shallow breaths, but with each breath, he could feel dirt enter his nose. Was this his end? Suffocated by a pile of dirt? Not all the glorious end he envisioned. Panic set in and Pepper did his best to try and move, but he was stuck in place. Suddenly he could feel his hand fall from the dirt. Two pairs of hands gripped his forearm and tugged with all their might. Barry and Hatsuo pulled Pepper from his tomb of dirt. The demi took a deep breath and began to cough out the rank dirt. The three men sat panting, trying to catch their breath. "I hate Vietnam." Pepper finally spoke. "We need to get you to the dock." Barry cupped Pepper under his arms, and Hatsuo lifted his feet. The struggle to get through the tunnel was a chore. They not only had to fit themselves through the tunnel, but also wiggle Pepper down the narrow tunnels. Pepper was in pain, but he was grateful to be out of the pile of dirt that almost took his life. The tree finally made it to the entrance. Barry yelled up towards Flynn that they needed help. Flynn stuck half his body inside to grip Pepper's underarms. The two pushed and Flynn pulled Pepper up and out through the small entrance. As soon as Pepper was out and away from the entrance, Flynn dug in his bag for supplies to help the injured demigod. Barry and Hatsuo hopped out of the tunnel and walked towards Pepper. Barry helped Flynn bandage Pepper as he cursed. "That was stupid," Pepper grunted. The room was filled with Kongs. "I am never going in another tunnel," he declared. "The wounds are not life-threatening." "You are lucky. Just need to get them cleaned." Flynn spoke up. "So, I guess we did all that for nothing?" Barry sighed. He also didn't want to go back down in the tunnels. Hatsuo began to speak in Japanese, and he showed the men the papers he had found. Barry had no clue what he was going on about, so he glanced at Flynn to translate. He said he found maps and a list. Flynn spoke as he took care of Pepper. "What does it say?" Pepper asked. Hatsuo was not fluent, but he could make out some of the languages. He spoke in Japanese, and Flynn began to translate. "He says it looks like a hit list. A hit list of the officers in Saigon. He also says it is a layout of the tunnels, as well as locations of other tunnels." "Good, well we will give this to Angela, and they can send the mossy tunnel rats. I am done with tunnels." Pepper coughed up more dirt. "You really need to speak English, Wolfman." Barry shook his head and glared at Hatsuo. Hatsuo glared back at Barry with the same anger. Flynn shook his head a bit as he continued to work on Pepper. Chapter 3. On the way back from the tunnels, the four men took rest at the same halfway mark as before. This time they let Pepper sleep so he could heal faster. Even though the group wanted to make it back to camp and be out of this god-forsaken jungle, they knew they needed to take it slow. The enemy was always no doubt around them, plus they were a man short with Pepper being injured. Hatsuo kept watching as the others slept as well. They would rest here longer than before due to the injuries their leader had sustained. Every 3 hours they would route watchmen until the sun peeked over the thick jungle trees. Pepper jumped awake and soon regretted it. He gasped and held his side. For the most part, his outward wounds were healed. It was just the internal damage that was taking longer, but still faster than any human could heal. Flynn noticed Pepper was awake and made his way over to examine him. "I see you are healing up nicely. Good. We will need to make up for lost time today, so Rami does not grow and worry," the lion doctor explains as he helps Pepper up. Pepper sees a figure out of the corner of his eyes. As he turns his head, the dark shadow disappears. The demigod chalked it up to his injuries. He knew if it was truly someone, the wolf would have had sniffed it out. "Were we followed?" he asked as he watched the others pack up camp. "No, not that I am aware of, but no doubt they will be tracking us," Barry spoke up. "All right, let's double time back to the chopper." Pepper grits his teeth, pushes back the pain and jogged into the jungle. His men followed him, always keeping an eye on their surroundings. Pepper pushed through the pain as he led his men forward. He hadn't felt this much agony since he broke up with his last girlfriend. She was an Amazon, a female Greek warrior in the Amazon tribe. The tribe was strong women blessed by his father. Ares granted the females their abilities for their service to him since ancient times. Like everything else, the tribe and the traditions migrated half of their people west to the New World. The old gods, fallen angels, had all agreed to share the New World, unlike before where each group had its own section to rule. Zeus the Greeks and Romans, Ra the African continent, and Aten most of the northern territories, but this new land the humans populated was like the Wild West. Of course, the spirits and demons roamed before the flood. The dying resulted in the spirits the Native American and South American people witnessed. They were tales from the old world and Babel. When God separated the languages and the people migrated elsewhere, but the main ancient religions and old gods tended to stay around the old world. These people took their worship of the old gods with them and their interpretation of those gods, but the deities themselves stayed close to Israel, the place where it began and where everything would end in the final battle. Pepper had grown in these studies as a boy. Not only did his father want him to know about the art of war and fighting, but also where he had come from. This information was also taught to the Amazons, whom he trained alongside. It was only a matter of time for one to catch the demigod's eye. That Amazon's name was Lacey, and she was one of the top fighters in her clan. The two had many night flings before he was sent out to Vietnam. Lacey ended their affair a few weeks before Pepper was shipped off. Pepper did not want to give up their relationship, but Lacey insisted. 3 broken ribs and a bloody nose insisted. The pain Pepper currently felt was the same pain Lacey had given him, both mentally and physically. With the stress of this jungle and the enemy, on top of keeping these men under his supervision, safe was a lot on his shoulders. Not to mention the main reason he was out there, the representation of his father. As the men approached their destination, they could hear the faint sounds of yelling. Pepper halted and did his best to slow his breathing, so he could listen to the sounds coming from ahead. The wolf took a leap up the nearest tree to get a view ahead of them. He shouted to Flynn in Japanese. Flynn's face dropped from his normally serious face to one of anger and worry. The doctor took off running towards the sounds. The others followed behind without a clue. "What is going on?" Pepper asked as he tried to keep up with the lion. "Rami is surrounded by a group of enemy Vietcongs." Hatsuo leaped from tree to tree in his now wolf form and landed in front of Flynn. Flynn removed the katana from the mouth of the huge lichen wolf. Hatsuo left his clothes behind, but he would dare not leave his family's sword. Flynn took it for safekeeping so the wolf could focus on the fight and have free jaws to do so. Barry made sure he was loaded as he branched off to circle around to the flank of the men. Rami was supernatural and a wolf, but he was small. As shifter types. His form was as a large jackal dog, not a huge monster like that of Hatsuo and Flynn. Flynn refrained from shifting to his lion form. He was the only doctor around, and he needed to be available to give care. Pepper watched the men jump into action without him needing to call orders. Each man knew their goal, to save their fellow man Rami. Rami did his best to fight the group of men off, but he was small and alone. The butt of an old rifle knocked him to the ground with great force. The Egyptian spit blood and a single tooth out on the ground. He watched the green shards now drip with crimson. He turned to see the other men go for his helicopter. Rami attempted to get off the ground to attack, but he was met with another swat from the rifle. The man now pointed the gun at him and screamed in Vietnamese. Just as he was about to pull the trigger to kill Rami, Hatsuo leaped out and chopped down on the man's arm. The force of the bit took it to clean off, and the man was too shocked to scream. It took a moment for it to set in what had happened, and the man screamed. His screams alerted the others who were on the helicopter and around it. They turned around and began firing at the two. Hatsuo scooped up Rami and did his best to avoid the bullets. Barry, exiting from behind the chopper, began to fire at them. Flynn also made an exit from the right of the men as hailed a rain of bullets upon the enemy. The Viet Cong group was now disorganized and dropping like flies. Pepper reached the tree line, but just as he was about to exit, he was stopped. A cold chill ran up his spine, and the same shadow figure he had seen appeared. This time it was in front of him. No doubt about it, this was death. Not Thanatos, the fallen angel of death, not Hades, the ruler of Tartarus and the dead, but the actual entity of death. The embodiment of the thing itself. When death spoke, it made the air around them cold and bitter. Pepper. His voice was deep and raspy, and it filled the area where the young demigod stood. Fear not. I am neither an enemy nor a friend to you. Death is but a necessity. I am an enemy to most, but I do care for this world and my job. Pepper was confused, and Death knew this. The formless shadow morphed into a man-like image. Pale skin and dark shoulder-length hair. He wore a black robe that embodied darkness. At his feet, the grass wilted and decayed. I was born when Adam took a bite from the fruit. Released along with the other curses God put forthcoming upon this earth. He explains. Pepper rose a brow. He was a bit scared, but his mind kept going to his men ahead of him in the clearing. What does death want with me? Pepper asked. I come bearing a warning. It is up to you to take heed. The darkness speaks to your father much as he did to your father's master Lucifer. It wants out, and if you do not stop your father, it will be released. The darkness? Pepper was even more confused. The darkness is as old as the beginning. It was the first enemy God defeated when he created light. It helped to corrupt Lucifer, resulting in the fall, and now wishes to be set free once more. It grows impatient with Lucifer's deal and has poisoned Ares. Your father is trying to open a portal to let it and its offspring into the dimension. You and your men must stop him. After Death finished his sentence, he vanished in a blink of an eye. The only thing that remained to hint at Death's presence was a dead spot of earth left behind. Pepper snapped out of his daze and ran forward into the clearing. Flynn, Barry, and Hatsuo cleared out most of the men. The last remaining were either dead or dying. Pepper blinked and for a moment could see death collecting them. Flynn called out to Pepper as he wiped the blood from his face. The doctor could tell something was deeply troubling Pepper. "Pepper, are you all right?" Flynn asked. Pepper took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, but I will explain when we reach the base." "Will Rami be all right?" he asked, looking around the open field. "Yes, sir." Rami walked out from behind the large wolf and towards Pepper. He had a black eye and a swollen jaw, but he wore it with a smile on his face. His friends had arrived to help him. Flynn retrieved a blanket from the chopper and handed it to Hatsuo. He shifted back to his human form and wrapped it around his waist. Flynn then returned his sword, and the two walked past Pepper to board the helicopter. Barry soon followed the two men and turned to holler at Pepper and Rami. "Come on. Let's get going." The super soldier yelled impatiently. "Are you all right to fly?" Pepper rose a brow. "Of course." Rami walked briskly back to the helicopter, waving off the complainant Barry with a smile. Okay. Give me a second to get her started up." Rami's happy-go-lucky attitude marveled at Pepper. That, along with the visitation by death, along with his injuries, caused him to drift again into a daze. Flynn hollered towards Pepper to make sure he was all right. Pepper waved off the doctor and finally made his way towards the helicopter. Death had given him a lot to process. He respected and was an obedient soldier and son to his father. How could he go against the fallen angel's wishes? Could he stand up to his father? And why would he? He was part of this army, right? He was supposed to follow orders. But how could he follow orders to allow such a thing to happen to this world? No doubt that the darkness would enter and swallow everything up, including his mother and a few friends he had made. Pepper was as selfish at times, but even he could see how this would ruin everything. What kind of deal was his father trying to make in releasing such a thing that God himself locked away? Something that Lucy, the main baddie, and the leader of the army of darkness, had not even released yet. So many thoughts and questions flooded Pepper's mind as he boarded the helicopter. As it lifted off the ground, he could see one last flash of death looking up at him with his dark eyes. What kind of responsibility did he just cast on the demigod's shoulder? Back at the base, as the men made their way towards the barracks for patching up, food and rest, Pepper made his way towards Angela's office. Angela rose from her desk as Pepper barged in. "Excuse you," she crossed her arms and gave Pepper a death glare. "Is there something you are not telling me, telling my men?" He growled. "I am telling you everything you need to know and what Ares tells me." She smacked her lips. Angela exchanges word a bit more with Pepper before he raises his voice above hers and slams his hand on her desk. "Death told me." That was all he could spit out. Angela rose a brow. She was curious now. "Death told you what?" she asked, uncrossing her arms and moving a hand to her hip. Pepper took a deep breath and locked eyes with the woman. He wanted her to know how serious he was. "My father is up to something behind the scenes," Pepper grunted. "This operation and this team are just to cover up what he is really doing out here. We are his pawns." He explains to Angela everything Death revealed to him. He knew he could trust Angela. She might have worked for Ares, but the face she made when Pepper revealed to her she was being played told him she was one not to be used. "I signed up to serve my country and trusted your father to keep it and my family safe. I will not allow him to let this darkness destroy it." She reached into her desk and tossed him a notebook. "The last entries are where your father is located." Pepper caught the notebook and thumbs through it. "Just so you know, If you survive and return, I will not be here. And if you come looking for me, you will find nothing but a bullet." She pointed at Pepper to make sure he understood her. Pepper nodded and left the office without saying a word. Now he needed to convince the other 4 men to join him in stopping his father. Chapter 4. Rain clouds rolled in as thunder and lightning crashed across the night sky, lighting up the night for a split second. It was enough to let the 4 men in the helicopter find a decent landing spot. The men agreed that helping Pepper deal with his father was more important and worth more than the mission and money they were being paid. Ares had to be stopped, but Pepper had no idea how he would achieve this. Ares was a powerful entity, a god to most, and a fallen angel of great powers. All the bloodshed and fighting of this war were fueling his power even as we speak. Pepper's stomach was in knots. He would have to face off against the man he called father. To betray all he was taught and all he took an oath for. They may have been criminals and lowlifes, but this darkness would destroy the world, no doubt. The men would follow Pepper into certain death, no doubt, if it meant saving this world. Rami sat the helicopter down and killed the engine. He removed his headset and walked towards the back of the helicopter. "Now is the time to turn back if you want. No one would blame you." Pepper spoke up, but the others were silent. They stood waiting for orders from their leader. "We have the advantage of surprise. Ares believes we are still on those various missions for him. He would never suspect us to turn on him, especially not my betrayal anyways. I believe we have another upper hand in this fight. Death himself sent us, so perhaps he will also aid us. We need to make a pact, here and now. If any one of us dies now or in the future, someone will take care of our family. I have a wife at home." Barry explains. "And whatever happens to me, one of you guys will make sure she is taken care of, right?" he asked. The other men agreed before they continued to figure out a plan to take the Greek god of war down. Ares stood at the end of the small boat as it entered the dark entrance of the cave. The cave was carved by the river inside the large mountain that towered above. It was a perfect spot for Ares's men to make camp. The river was the only way in or out of the place, and it was also unknown to anyone besides the locals. No map showed the cave, only the mountain. The place reminded Ares of Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi was an ancient Roman city located at the southwestern base of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon was the location where a branch of the fallen angels touched down and made a pact to continue with their mission to take wives and teach mankind the forbidden. The Chiron Philippi, it was adjacent to a spring, grotto, and related shrines dedicated to the Greek god Pan. This mountain had a cave with a river much like the place of ancient times, and Ares was a sucker for trading. Behind Ares's boat, a few more followed under the cloak of darkness. They snaked their way down the river deeper into the cave until they reached a small sandy bank. The boats anchored and the Greek god exited the boat. He was followed by his men as well as another tall figure dressed in all black leather. The figure wore a long trench coat with WW2 German Nazi symbols. The hat was that of a general, and his face was masked with the Nazi eagle and swastika. The only thing visible on the man was his green glowing eyes. "Kurt, I appreciate you meeting me here," Ares spoke as he walked with the man. The necromancer nodded with respect towards the god. "Of course, my lord. I am honored to aid you in your attempt. I apologize on behalf of Rasputin, he could not make it. He sends his regards and loyalty with these." Kurt opened a box. The glow of gold glittered on the sides of the cave. "The blood of 100 male children, to aid in your ritual." Ares reached into the box and touched the large cylinder glass and gold vial that held the blood. Excellent. Shall we proceed? The darkness grows impatient. Kurt nods and closes the box. He then hands it to a Japanese woman who wore a silver collar. She was not there by choice, but Kurt's slave. Your new pet is interesting. A fox? Ares asked in regard to Kurt's girl. Yes, she is a kitsune and aids my power at times. She is very young, so training her should be easier than the others before her. Kurt removed his leather gloves and stuffed them into his pocket. He then removed his mask and glanced down at the fox lady. She kept her eyes on the ground as the males spoke about her. A dozen men walked into the large cave's chamber wearing long black robes. Silently they made their way past the three and started to prepare the large space beside them for where the ceremony would take place. Sigils and signs were drawn all the while Ares and Kurt watched on. Akio, go and retrieve my box. Kurt snapped his fingers at the kitsune. She nodded and turned to do as her master commanded. Ares, in the form of an old general, continued to watch the robed men set up black and white candles around the large circle. Make sure to dig a 3-foot wide and deep trench around Kurt commanded the men. You know this ritual will take a lot of blood, and some of your powers Ares. Kurt removed his leather trench coat and draped it over Aiko's shoulders. The young woman stood like a statue holding the large box the necromancer told her to obtain. I am aware, Ares replied. Kurt took his hat and placed it on Aiko as well. The large clothing items dwarfed the tiny Asian woman. Kurt ran in hands through his blonde hair to flatten the few that were messed up from his hat. Kurt then opened the box and took hold of an old book and a knife. Both were ancient and were adorned in sigils. The very book Nimrod and his priest wrote at Babel. Kurt grins as he turns to walk towards the place where the robed men were. Bring the sacrifices in, he commanded in a thick German accent. 2 robed men walked to the large cages on the other side of the cage. They then began to lead people of all ages and ethnicities towards the circle. Pepper and his men followed the directions inside the notebook Angela gave them. The map inside the notebook led them out of the jungle straight to the mountains. At the mouth of the largest one, a giant cave was carved into it. A small river fed into the cave, and the 4 knew it was the only way inside. I hope y'all can swim. Pepper glanced at the others. What kind of soldier would I be if I couldn't swim? Barry spoke in a gruff tone. Hatsuo made a smart remark in Japanese that made Flynn chuckle. Rami raised his hands slowly. I can't. You can't swim. Barry whips his head around to face him. I grew up in the sand. You know the desert, the opposite of water. Rami chuckled nervously. All right, Rami, you stay out here and guard the exit. If anyone exists that isn't us, shoot them. Rami had no complaints and nodded, walking away from the 3 men. The 3 men then took off their packs and gear. They would only need the necessities inside. The weight of all their gear would no doubt tire them out, and they would drown before reaching where Ares was located. The men swam a good distance in the pitch-black warm water until they finally saw a faint light. They paused for a moment to rest before going under the water completely. Taking a deep breath, Pepper submerged under the water completely. The other 3 followed behind. They quickly swam under the water until they reached the boats on the bank. Pepper was the first to pop the top of his head out of the water. No one was around, so the demigod slowly swam alongside the boat until his feet hit the bottom. The other men separated and went in different directions. They would take as many men as possible out silently in the darkness. Pepper held the man and was about to plunge his knife into him when the sounds of screaming caught him off guard. He turned to see his father standing behind a tall blond man. The man held a book and chanted as men in robes killed people that were lined up. It was a slaughter, and it made Pepper's stomach turn in disgust. Pepper killed, but never innocent people like this. This was a massacre. The men almost made it towards Ares, but the god felt the presence of his son. "Come to claim your place beside me?" Ares spoke with a smile. However, his smile dropped when he saw his son kill one of his men. "Platon, what are you doing?" he asked almost in a concerned voice. "I am here to stop you." "What?" Ares almost let out a laugh. Pepper dropped the body and walked boldly towards Ares. Flynn, Barry, and Hatsuo continued to fight in the darkness. "You heard me. I heard you. You just aren't talking sense. You are my son. You are to take your place by my side." "I don't understand." Ares growled. "I came here to stop you. How hard is that to understand?" Pepper spoke in a cocky tone. "Don't take that tone with me, boy. I'm not really your boy." Pepper growled. "How did you know I was here? Who told you about this?" Ares's eyes darted to Pepper's men as they began to come from the shadows. "Death, death? Is this a joke? Death is an enemy to the Creator as much as we are. We are on the same side." Ares pointed at Pepper and then to himself. The Greek god could not understand why Death would tell Pepper about this. "Are you choosing my father over me?" Ares asked. "I never had a choice before, and now I do. So yes, or no, I am not sure. All I know is this." Pepper pointed to the ceremony. "This isn't happening." Pepper waited and watched Ares. Ares's anger bubbled over and could not be contained. The Greek went to charge his son, but a force was pulling him back. A small black ring formed in the large bloody circle. The portal was starting to open and began to drain not only the blood slain for it, but also Ares's essence. "Now!" Pepper commanded his men to charge the others while he charged the god. Pepper knew he would not have another chance to defeat Ares. The men in robes stopped chanting and killing the sacrifices. They turned to rush the three men. Kurt noticed the men but continued to chant and focus on the portal. Black swirls of mist grew larger and larger. In the middle of the mist, a tiny penny-sized black hole formed. Hatsuo remained in his human form as he cut down the men with his sword. Barry mowed down others with his machine gun. When he ran out of bullets, the super soldier used his strength and skill to fight the men. Flynn noticed they needed to take down the necromancer. He ran towards Kurt but stopped by a hand around his ankle. Kurt's green eyes leaked a mist. That mist flowed into the dead men, raising them from the dead. Flynn kicked the corpse from his ankle and began to shoot the dead crawling in the ground in the head. Kurt was growing weak due to the split of his power. He reached out and grabbed Aiko by the collar. He began draining her essence so he could keep going. Flynn noticed this and knew he had to intervene. The line weaved between zombies as he ran towards Kurt. Suddenly a large tentacle broke through the portal and grabbed Flynn around the waist. He let out a roar as he tried to break free. Hatsuo heard his fellow soldier in trouble. He quickly leaped in the air and brought his katana down on the tentacle. Black ooze spewed out as it fell twitching. Pepper tried to shoot at Ares, but the Greek god avoided each bullet. Even though he was being drained, he was still powerful. Pepper soon dropped the rifle and began exchanging punches with Ares. At first, Pepper had the upper hand, but the pure rage of Ares began to overpower Pepper. Just when Ares was about to land a large blow onto Pepper's face, Barry rolled over and legs swept the Greek. Ares fell hard in the sand. Barry then stood up to balance Pepper. Pepper then gave a thankful nod before the two men began to fight the fallen angel once more. Ares punched Pepper, causing him to fall to the ground. Barry went to land another leg sweep, but Ares jumped and kneed the soldier hard. While Pepper was on the ground, he was able to grab hold of a knife from his boot. He quickly plunged it into the thigh of Ares. Ares almost buckled in pain as he let out a scream. Hatsuo sliced and diced the tentacles that continued to escape the enlarging portal. Flynn did his best to avoid the other tentacles and other creatures that escaped the portal. The lion finally greeted the necromancer with a tackle. Flynn, Kurt, and Aiko went to the ground hard. The book went flying across the sand, and the portal stopped enlarging. The two men began to roll around in the dirt tussling. The drained Aiko did her best to crawl away from the chaos. She noticed the knife on the ground and picked it up. She then began to use the knife to saw at the collar around her neck. Kurt got the upper hand on the lion. He punched him as hard as he could with the remaining strength he had. Flynn landed on his back in the dirt as Kurt stood up. The necromancy pulled out his gun and shot at the lion. He then turned to run towards Aiko. He quickly knocked the knife from her hands with great force. Enraged at what she was doing, Kurt yanked Aiko by her hair and cursed at her in German. The necromancer knew there was no way the portal could be opened now. The ritual was ruined, so Kurt took up Aiko by the waist and ran towards a boat. The two escaped with a few of his men downriver. Ares noticed the power stopped being drained from him. He glanced behind him to see the black mist slowly disappearing as this small black hole began to close. He also noticed Kurt was fleeing on a boat. That coward, the Greek thought before turning to glare at Pepper. Ares removed the knife from his thigh and dropped it to the ground. The fallen angel knew he could not continue to fight in his weakened condition. "You will regret this, and you will pay greatly." And with that Ares teleported out. Pepper was a bit relieved when he saw his father disappear. Also, a sigh of relief swept over him when he noticed the portal was closed. A few shadowy creatures crept away towards the dark deep cave, but it was better than letting the whole dark entity in. The demi just lay there trying to catch his breath. Hatsuo cleaned his sword before sheathing it. He walked to the doctor who lay in the dirt holding his side. "Reach in my bag and grab my kit," Flynn instructed as he grunted in pain. Crimson streaks stained the doctor's hand as he applied pressure to the bullet wound. Soon after Flynn was patched up, the men buried the bodies of the slain people to show respect. They felt it was the right thing to do before leaving. Those poor souls who were butchered deserved better in life, so the men at least gave them a proper burial. The boat ride back to the cave entrance was quiet. The four men were trying to process everything that had just happened, especially Pepper. The demigod knew he was marked by Ares. No doubt the fallen angel would seek to kill him. Him and the rest of his small group of men. Pepper knew could not go back to Texas, that would only put his mother in danger. Ares would not want to harm his mother being she was one of his concubines, but no doubt he would try if it was something to lure Pepper in. Even more reason for Pepper to stay away from her. As long as he was hidden in the jungle, Ares would be too worried searching for him and not his mother. They finally made their way out of the cave and towards Little Rami. The wolf spoke excitedly trying to figure out all that happened inside. Barry gave him a short reply while Pepper warned him. In fact, he warned all of them. Ares would, no doubt, came for them, and it was best if they went into hiding. They all agreed and shook hands for the last time. Each man gave respect to the other before heading off in different directions into the jungle. The SOAP division had ended with them. Chapter 5. 3 years later, Pepper defected from the army and made a home for himself in a recluse village in the jungles of Vietnam. It was hard adjusting to life, but surprisingly the people of the village accepted him. It was the same village he had saved from the dragon in Viet Cong, so the return of the soldier was greatly welcomed. Pepper helped the people rebuild as well as manage the daily life of the village. Sho was exceptionally happy for the return of her savior, and it wasn't long before the two were married. A year after they were married, Sho gave birth to their first child. It was a girl and Pepper adored the little one. Pepper was not only a husband and a father, but also a protector of the village. Any stranger and any supernatural being that tried to come against the village, Pepper took care of it. He was on the road to becoming an enemy of the army of darkness. He knew it was not going to be easy. Ares and his minions were all he had known in his life. He was born into violence and battle, and he knew nothing of Jesus or the way to get out of his predicament. Pepper had heard rumors of the judges and their conquests against Ares growing up, but he never ran into one of God's chosen. The other side of the board was almost a fabled or fairy tale to him. Pepper had always fought against other humans and supernatural for his father. He never dove into the beliefs of the ones he fought, less along who the actual enemy to Ares was. He only obeys his orders to fight and nothing more. He never investigated the other side, and it was Pepper's downfall. If he would have searched and found help in God and his army, they would have aided him, especially from what was about to occur. It was a normal day for Pepper. He rose before dawn and made his rounds through and around the village. After making sure the large village was secured, he would arrive at his wife's uncle's small shop for breakfast. After eating his fill of food, Pepper would then make his way down to the rice fields to help the other villages with whatever they needed. Around noon, when the sun was at its peak, Pepper would return home for lunch. Pepper returned to a scene of horror. The small homes that lined up around his home had all been destroyed. Debris and bodies were strung out in the dirt and leaves. Pepper's heart raced and his stomach twisted with each step as he ran towards his home. Before he could make it up the small steps, Ares teleported in front of him. The fallen angel still wore the disguise of an old general to Pepper's surprise. The fallen angel would often shift to different appearances to meet his needs, so the demi wondered why he was still looking this way. It was a tiny thought that was jumbled on top of the others that screamed in his mind. Where was his wife? Where were his kids? Were they okay, or did Ares get to them? Pepper's face beat red with anger and worry on top of the fact of his work in the field that day. "Pepper, my boy." Ares grinned in an unsettling way that made Pepper want to punch him. "I am not your boy," he snapped back. "Oh, you will always be my son, Pepper. I raised you, trained you, gave you powers, and even though you betrayed me, I am still gracious to you. Allowing you to live, more like I allowed you to live." Pepper puffed up his chest. Ares chuckled a bit at Pepper's arrogance. Ares knew the demigod got that spirit from him. "I am willing to forgive and move past what occurred if you would put this simple." He tried to be as nice as he could, as he tried to convince Pepper to come back to his side. "This simple life you have here aside and lead my army." "No." Pepper clenched his fist as he replied. "No?" No. Ares processed to get in the face of Pepper and scream like a drill sergeant. "I raised you, boy. Give you and your mother home and let you live agger the stunt you pulled. You owe me everything. The very breath you take it because I allow it." He continues to scream all the while Pepper glared at him. "The darkness will come. It will be unleashed on this world with or without you. You will come around to me. You will choose and become what I have trained you to be. It just will take some tough love, I suppose. You will live with your mistake, and perhaps I will in the future accept your apology. Once you see the errors of your ways and decide to serve me, then you can have happiness, but until then, you will suffer. Death will not even calm you. You will live until you learn and take up the role I have given you. Ares snapped his fingers. Screams echoed inside the small home, and Pepper almost went berserk. Ares grabbed him from behind and put him in a chokehold. The fallen angel was way stronger than Pepper, but Pepper did his best to break through. Lesson 1. Grief. Ares laughed and finally let Pepper go. The fallen one then let out a wicked laugh as he disappeared. Once Pepper was free, he bolted inside the house. His sprint inside was halted by the Crimson River in front of him. Pepper's boot stopped just short of the disaster before him. His wife and 2 kids lay dead on the floor of their little home. Ares had them killed for punishment. They perished due to his rebellion. Hot tears escaped his eyes as he knelt to hold his family one last time. "I'm so sorry." He sobbed into his wife's hair as he tried to take one last embrace. The last time he would ever hold her and smell the coconut in her hair. The last time he would kiss her and his children as they lay dying in his arms. He could hear their heartbeats slowing and finally, stop. Pepper laid them down on the floor and covered them with a blanket. He then sat on the couch across from them and just stared at the outline of their bodies. Guilt, anger, sorrow, and past mistakes screamed inside of his mind. The voices of condemnation pounded louder than anything. This was a greater punishment than he could bear. If he could, he would have killed himself to join his family in death, but Ares's words echoed in his thoughts on repeat. Not even death will calm him. The sun finally sank, and Pepper began to slowly bury his family. When he was finished, he burned down his home. The flames lit up the jungle as he made his way inside the thick trees. He would return home to Texas to see his mother, but as a Greek tragedy, she was also taken from him. His mother was hanging in their family home. Her body was just a skeleton remaining over the bed she shared with that devil. Ares had no doubt killed her first, before making his way into the jungles of Vietnam to find Pepper. Everyone Pepper cared about was killed because of him. Months went by with the demigod being stuck in a depression of self-loathing until it clicked one day. Ares claimed he could not die, and an oath like that was binding. Every fallen angel, demon, and agent human or super had to obey it. That meant Pepper could go after anyone in Ares's army. Blood for blood. A man with nothing left to lose was a dangerous thing, especially when he had a mission. Pepper's new mission was to hunt and kill anyone associated with Ares. Chapter 6. The 1980s. The war has been in existence since the fall of Lucifer, but with modern times, humans made modern rules. These were rules set up by the underground human government and the judges. The black files had not been set up worldwide yet, so the hunters, judges, and humans began the work of registration. In the past, all monsters would have been slain, but things are harder now that other humans sympathize and want laws in place. The humans tried to make laws. They are as follows. Non-human registration included. All non-humans of classification C and above must be registered with the relevant authorities, wear a badge, and appear for a monthly evaluation and review with an assigned agent. Unregistered non-humans will be considered criminals and taken into custody in a maximum security prison. Non-humans X are prohibited from feeding on other humans or non-humans. If they break this law, they will be executed immediately. Classification of non-humans. A. Individual with acceptable human appearance, but is effective but controllable powers and abilities during combat. They cannot change in shape or appearance. Witches enter this classification. Human intelligence. B. Individual with an almost human appearance, but with certain visible changes, such as eye and skin color, not typical of the species. His abilities are still within the acceptable range of control. Human intelligence. C. Humanoid individual with shape-shifting powers and abilities. They are characterized by consciously altering their humanoid appearance, even to animal transformation. Keep under supervision to avoid identity theft. Variable intelligence. D. Humanoid individual with high-risk powers and unstable shape-shifting abilities. They can be controlled with sedatives or the appropriate force. These individuals are characterized by altering their form against their will, resulting in a humanoid-animal mix. Most were born that way, but there are cases of curses. Werewolves are an example. Variable intelligence. E. Individual with little visible anthropomorphic characteristics. They may have wings, horns, a tail or other non-human aspects, but they maintain a humanoid appearance. They do not have special powers, but they do possess physical abilities superior to the average human. Variable intelligence. F. Anthropomorphic individual. Its appearance is closer to that of an animal than that of a humanoid. Some possess special powers through learning magic. They have physical abilities superior to the average human. Almost animal intelligence. Or Omega individual. Humanoid or anthropomorphic creatures and subjects with destructive powers and high-risk abilities. Difficult to control. High intelligence. Dragons, demons, and elementals fall into this category. X individual X non-living creature. They maintain human intelligence, may have powers, have superhuman strength, and possess high-risk abilities. They feed on living things to survive and can convert other humans. You can negotiate with them, but the execution is advised. Necromancers and vampires fall into this classification. Z individuals seen on living creatures without intelligence. Uncontrolled destructive abilities, superhuman strength. Run instantly. Zombies fall into this classification. The judges did their best to follow these laws on the surface, but if any demon or fallen angel stepped in their path, they would be eliminated. They knew all were in the realm of Lucifer control. The powers came from the darkness. Humans with abilities were spared due to them having a soul. They had a chance to renounce their powers and change their ways, but it was all free will. Only they could make the decision. Now with the person who attacked the judge could defend themselves and other individuals from threats. Also, werewolves were humans possessed by a demon. If they killed the wolf, the demons would leave, leaving a dead body of a human. Pepper knew this hierarchy and where he was ranked. He did his best to live in the world he was molded into, but part of him knew he didn't belong. He tried to stay on the fringes of this world due to the hatred he had for Ares. The demigods slaughtered many of Ares's men as well as other supernatural beings. He was so good at it he made a living from it. At one point he ran into the judges. They allowed him to live since he was a human. Also due to the fact he was fighting the very people they were. If Pepper ever turned on the judges and or hurt innocent people, then the judges shut him down, but until then he was left alone. To further rebel against Ares, in the early 80s Pepper worked for a crime lord in Spain. The man was the son of a demon and a higher-ranked mobster in Spain. He had worked for him for almost 10 years and gained much trust from the man. The man trusted Pepper and had asked him to watch over his daughter. Pepper did not like the demons or what they stood for, but the cash was too good to pass up, plus the demon hated Aries as much as him. Villa de Cortez in Madrid, Spain. Pepper, you need a date for my birthday ball. The small Latin woman fussed. I work for you, father, not you, brat. Pepper laughed to himself. Yes, you are a hitman and his bodyguard, but tonight you are mine and I want you to have a date. I'm tired of hearing about that other girl who left you. She just wanted your money, Pepper. She huffed and tried not to laugh at his expense, but she enjoyed teasing the old guy. Pepper still had Aries's blood in him, so he aged much slower than regular humans. He looked to be in his mid-30s, but he was older than that. Fine, whatever, Giselle. He waved his hand, not wanting to argue. Also, you need to just shave that balding head. Giselle roughed up the peach fuzz on his head. He tried to get away from the 5-foot woman and mumbled under his breath. Pepper was about to make a comment but was interrupted. The doorbell rang and the woman ran towards the door. She opened it and a blonde around the same age and height as she stood there smiling. The Latin woman, Giselle, jumped up and hugged her friend's neck. Meg, I'm glad you are here and don't worry, I have you a date for tonight. Giselle squealed in excitement. Jean, oh. The blonde shook her head trying to protest. No buts. I want everything perfect. That cowboy didn't deserve you. Wanna be Jesse James? She spat on the floor. Let's go and pick out our dresses and style our hair. Gigi led her friend Meg inside the mansion, passing up maids, guards, and other people running about. Meg smiled as she walked past everyone. What is the theme? Meg asked. Victorian Western. I have the perfect dress for you. Giselle pulled out 2 dresses. The red one is yours and mine is black. Giselle handed it to Meg. It kinda looks like Rose from Titanic's dress. Meg chuckled as she looked at the dress in her hands. Gigi ambled on and dragged her friend all over the mansion. After doing their makeup and hair, the 2 females quickly got dressed. The females then made their way downstairs. Gigi had finished up first and practically ran down the stairs. Is my date here yet? Pepper? Yours is ready. She chuckled as Meg walked out behind her. Pepper blinked a bit. The blonde was beautiful, but he was still looking to get back with his ex-girlfriend. Aries was not wrong when he said Pepper would be miserable. He tried to move on from his dead wife, but he could not find happiness. The ex used him, but Pepper was hooked on her. He longed for companionship. Meg stood beside her friend and shyly looked over to Pepper. Well, let's go. I'm ready to party. Gigi pushed Meg into Pepper's chest and walked out the door. Meg was a bit embarrassed as she caught herself on his chest and pushed off. Sorry. Meg apologizes as she follows her friend. Pepper was silent as he made his way towards the car. The demi was fuming over this situation, but knew Giselle always got her way. The ball was set downtown for all the head families to attend. Gigi's dad, Pedro Cortez, was head honcho in Spain, so this was not only a party for his daughter, but for the others to meet without the police being suspicious. It also showed the man's wealth and power to all who attended. He was the head boss of the family business. Money, guns, drugs, people, and more contributed to his wealth and status. His only daughter Giselle was his princess, and he gave her everything. Giselle made a grand entrance on stage, but Meg and Pepper branched off to have a seat in the crowd. The two sat side by side looking up at the stage as the announcer talked. The blonde decided to break the awkward silence between the two. "So how long have you worked for Gigi's father?" Meg broke the awkward silence. "About 2.5 years." Pepper glanced over at Meg. Meg kept her eyes on her hands in her lap. She was the opposite of her friend. "I'm sorry, I'm just a bit aggravated about Giselle making me do this. Also, my recent breakup has me on edge." "It is nothing you did, kid." Pepper didn't want the girl to think it was her he was mad at. "Your friend pretty much forced me to come," Pepper added. "Oh, I understand." She chuckled nervously. "After the death of my husband, she made me a date. I wasn't ready and it resulted in my recent breakup," she confesses. The two chits chatted a bit until Gigi took the mic on stage. "Thank you all for coming. I want everyone to have fun and enjoy my party. Thank you again, Daddy. Cake and food will be served later, but the first thing on the agenda is the swap. It is a game I made. It is to test your partner. A single person here will attempt to steal away your date. Will he'll either be faithful? It is something fun, so no fighting." She glares. Meg rolled her eyes at Giselle. "Gigi and her theatrics." Meg cursed. "All right, everyone up and get to mingling," Giselle screamed into the mic. Pepper and Meg stood when everyone else did and filed their way towards the large dance floor. Well. Hey there, darling," a country voice came from behind Meg. She froze with terror. Pepper lifted a brow and glanced behind them. He watched a tall man dressed in a cowboy attire approach. "I'm your Huckleberry." He chuckled as Meg kept her back to him. "You know this clown?" Pepper looked at the cowboy get up and shook his head. He then noticed Meg a bit angered and stressed. He could tell she was uncomfortable. "Come on, Meg, you miss me?" The man smirked as he stood behind her. "No." She turned and glared at the cowboy. "Don't be harsh, darling." "No. Harsh would be trying to get into someone who's grieving pants. All those gentlemen get up is nothing." "You are a jerk, Jesse." She brushed past him, knocking him back a bit. Pepper just looked Jesse up and down with disgust as he walked after Meg. "Meg, where are you going?" Pepper asked. Meg stopped abruptly, turned her head, and snapped at Pepper. "Isn't like you wanted to be here less alone with me. Anyway, why don't you run along and find that other gold digger?" Meg huffed out of anger. "He left you because you wouldn't give it up," Pepper blurted out. Meg glared at Pepper before turning to storm past him. She wanted to leave, but it was her best friend's birthday. Meg finally stopped walking and took a seat at one of the empty tables. The blonde was close to tears at that point. She quickly took out a pen and started to sketch on a napkin. Meg's art was her stress relief, and she needed to calm down. "Aw, Meg, nice to see you." An older man came by Meg's table and smiled. "My wife loved the paintings. It gives her so much joy." The old man mob-type boss hugged her. Meg patted his back. "I'm glad to make her happy. If you need anything else, feel free to call or come by the studio." "Will do. I told my friends about you and how your art is like therapy. They will give you a call. Say hello to your brother for me." The man said his goodbyes and left the blonde alone. Meg had a talent. The artist could capture emotions in art, and when a person saw them, they felt that emotion. It was hard for her to speak her emotions, so this power let her express them. She used her gift to help people. The man's wife had lost her daughter, and the picture she painted allowed joy to come back in her life. Pepper took out a smoke and stood on the back wall. He wanted to leave but knew he could not. Parties were not his thing. Pepper would much rather be laying back in a chair drinking a bottle or four of beer. The demigod kept an eye on Giselle from afar. The small Latin woman was having the best time, that was until she noticed Pepper alone. Giselle noticed Meg alone and glared at Pepper. From across the room,